My daughter rejected my $50K gift under her fiancé's orders, so I made a move that left him desperate and questioning everything. The call came at 7:30 in the morning, my coffee still steaming beside yesterday's unfinished crossword puzzle. I'd been retired for exactly 4 months, finally free from 35 years of building Harrison Industries from a two-man operation into a manufacturing empire worth $42 million. The phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful silence of my kitchen like a blade through silk. "Dad, we need to talk." Sarah's voice carried that familiar edge, the one she'd perfected during her teenage years when she wanted something expensive. "It's about the wedding." I set down my mug carefully, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. Sarah's wedding was still 8 months away, but she'd been planning it with the military precision of a general preparing for war. Every detail scrutinized, every expense calculated, every vendor interviewed like they were applying for a government clearance. "What about the wedding, sweetheart? David and I have been discussing your offer." She paused, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. Probably David, her fiancé, coaching her through this conversation like he coached his marketing team through client presentations. "We've decided we can't accept your gift." The words hit me like cold water. For 6 months, I'd been planning to give them $50,000 as a wedding present. Not a loan, not an investment, but a gift. Clean money to help them start their life together, maybe put a down payment on a house, take a proper honeymoon, build something solid. "Can't accept it?" I repeated slowly. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "We want to do this ourselves, Dad. Build our own life without handouts. David feels very strongly about it." David feels strongly about it. Not Sarah, not we, but David. I'd heard this phrase increasingly often over the past 2 years, ever since my daughter had fallen under the spell of David Mitchell, the ambitious 32-year-old who'd swept her off her feet with talk of entrepreneurship and self-made success. Handouts? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "Sarah, this is your wedding gift from your father. It's not charity. I know you mean well, but we want to prove we can make it on our own. David says accepting money from family creates dependency, and we need to establish our independence from the start." I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden Margaret had planted before the cancer took her 3 years ago. The roses were blooming despite my amateur attempts at maintenance, stubborn and beautiful in their refusal to die. "And what do you say, Sarah? What do you think about all this?" Silence stretched between us like a gulf I couldn't cross. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller, younger, like the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. "I think David's right. We need to prove ourselves." Prove themselves. To whom? I'd built Harrison Industries from nothing, working 16-hour days in a rented garage while Margaret took care of baby Sarah. I knew what proving yourself meant, what it cost, what it required. But I also knew what family meant, what love looked like, what a father's pride felt like when he could provide for his children without asking for anything in return. "Sarah, let me ask you something. When you were 8 and wanted that piano, did I make you prove you deserved it first?" "That's different." "When you were 16 and needed a car for school, did I tell you to establish your independence?" "You Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder than it has to be. As if love was supposed to be easy, as if generosity was an inconvenience, as if 35 years of building wealth meant nothing when it came to sharing it with the person who mattered most. "What about college?" I pressed, unable to stop myself. 4 years at Northwestern, graduate school at Columbia. Did David tell you to give that money back too, since it created dependency? That was education. This is different. Different. Everything was different now that David Mitchell had entered her life with his theories about self-reliance and his obvious discomfort with the fact that his future father-in-law had more money than he'd ever dreamed of making. I'd met David 18 months ago at a family barbecue, watched him survey my house, my cars, my life, with the calculating gaze of someone taking inventory. He was polite, charming even, but I'd seen that look before in business meetings. The look of someone measuring themselves against what they saw and finding the comparison uncomfortable. "Tell me something, sweetheart. Whose idea was it really to refuse the gift, yours or David's?" Another pause, longer this time. In the background, I could hear David's voice, too muffled to make out words but clear enough to understand he was directing this conversation like a puppet master pulling strings. "It was a mutual decision, Dad. We both feel this is the right thing to do." Mutual decision. The phrase politicians used when they'd been backed into a corner by special interests. The phrase business partners used when the silent partner was calling the shots. I'd watched my daughter transform over the past 2 years from an independent woman with her own opinions into someone who prefaced every major decision with "David thinks," or "David feels," or "David says." It wasn't healthy, but I'd kept my mouth shut because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But this was different. This was my daughter rejecting not just money, but the love behind it. This was David Mitchell systematically isolating Sarah from her family's support, cutting the financial ties that might give her independence from his control. Sarah, I want you to listen to me very carefully. This gift isn't about creating dependency, it's about celebration. It's about a father who spent 35 years building something so he could share it with the people he loves most. I understand that, but do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your fiancé is more concerned with proving a point than with accepting love from your family. The line went quiet. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried a chill that reminded me painfully of Margaret during our worst arguments. David isn't the problem here, Dad. The problem is that you can't accept our decision. You always think money solves everything. Money solves everything. As if the 35 years I'd spent building Harrison Industries had been about money instead of security. As if every sacrifice I'd made, every risk I'd taken, every 16-hour day had been about accumulating wealth instead of providing for my family. Sarah, money doesn't solve everything, but it can solve the problem of 2 young people starting their lives together without the financial stress that destroys half the marriages in this country. We don't want to start our marriage by accepting handouts. There it was again, handouts. David's word, David's philosophy, David's systematic campaign to reframe generosity as weakness and family support as dependency. I closed my eyes, remembering Sarah at 5 years old, arms wrapped around my neck, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," after I'd read her favorite bedtime story for the 100th time. Where was that little girl now? What had happened to the woman who used to call me for advice about everything from car trouble to career decisions? "All right," I said quietly. "If that's really what you want, I'll respect your decision." Relief flooded her voice. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you'd understand." But I didn't understand. Not at all. What I understood was that David Mitchell had successfully convinced my daughter that accepting love from her father was somehow shameful. What I understood was that my $50,000 wedding gift had become a symbol of everything David resented about my success. What I understood was that this wasn't really about independence or self-reliance or proving anything. This was about control. David's control over Sarah, and by extension, his attempt to control me. "I love you, sweetheart," I said, meaning every word despite the pain spreading through my chest like spilled acid. "I love you too, Dad, and don't worry about us. David's company is doing really well. We'll be fine." David's company. Mitchell Marketing Solutions, the small digital advertising firm he'd started 3 years ago with 2 employees and big dreams. I'd done some quiet research after Sarah started getting serious with him, the kind of due diligence that had kept me alive in business for 4 decades. Mitchell Marketing Solutions was indeed doing well, but not as well as David liked to pretend. They had 7 employees, annual revenue around $800,000, and a client base that included mostly local businesses and a few regional companies. Respectable for a startup, but hardly the empire David presented to the world. More importantly, they were growing fast, which meant they were hungry for capital, for expansion opportunities, for the kind of strategic partnerships that could take them to the next level. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the morning sun move across Margaret's roses. She would have known what to do. Margaret always understood people better than I did, could read between the lines of what someone was really saying. But Margaret was gone, and I was left to figure this out on my own. I opened my laptop and typed Mitchell Marketing Solutions into the search bar. Their website loaded with David's professional headshot prominently displayed, his bio describing him as a visionary leader in digital marketing transformation. Visionary leader. The man who'd convinced my daughter that accepting her father's wedding gift was beneath their dignity. I spent the next hour reading everything I could find about David's company. Client testimonials, case studies, financial projections they'd made public in their quest for investment capital. Press releases about new hires, new contracts, new office space. And then I found something interesting, very interesting. A small item in the business section of the local paper from 6 months ago. Mitchell Marketing Solutions was seeking investors for a major expansion, looking to raise $2 million to fund aggressive growth plans and establish offices in 3 additional cities. $2 million, exactly the kind of money that would be life-changing for a small company like David's, the kind of money that could turn Mitchell Marketing Solutions from a respectable local firm into a regional powerhouse. The kind of money I could write a check for without even denting my investment portfolio. I closed the laptop and poured myself another cup of coffee, my mind already shifting into the strategic planning mode that had served me well in business. Sarah had made her choice, influenced by a man who seemed more interested in controlling her than loving her. But David Mitchell had made a choice too. He'd chosen to reject my generosity, to frame my love as weakness, to systematically distance my daughter from her family support. Now it was time for me to make a choice. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Peterson and Associates, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, this is Robert Harrison. Is Jim available? I need to discuss an acquisition opportunity. Mr. Harrison, it's been too long. Jim Peterson's voice carried the warmth of a 20-year business relationship. I heard you were enjoying retirement. What's got you thinking about acquisitions? I settled back in my leather chair, the one Margaret had insisted I needed for my home office, even though I'd protested it was too expensive. Now it felt like a command center, a place where important decisions got made. Jim, I need you to research a company called Mitchell Marketing Solutions. Small digital advertising firm, maybe 8 employees looking for investment capital. I want to know everything: financial statements, client contracts, growth projections, debt obligations, the works. And are you thinking about getting back into business? Because if you are, I should warn you that Margaret's ghost is probably going to haunt my office for encouraging you. Despite everything, I smiled. Jim had been Margaret's lawyer too, had handled her will, had sat with me in the hospital during those final weeks when the machines did more breathing than she did. This isn't about getting back into business. This is about family. The pause on Jim's end told me he understood. In 40 years of legal practice, Jim Peterson had seen every variation of family drama that money could create. He knew the difference between business decisions and personal ones, even when they looked identical on paper. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock. I want to know what David Mitchell had for breakfast this morning and whether he paid for it with company funds or personal money. David Mitchell, that's the young man your daughter is marrying. The same young man who just convinced her to refuse a $50,000 wedding gift because accepting family money would compromise their independence. Jim's low whistle carried clearly through the phone. I see. And you want to know if his principles about independence extend to business financing. Among other things, Jim, this isn't about revenge. It's about understanding what kind of man is about to become my son-in-law and what kind of company he's really running. Give me 48 hours. I'll have everything you need. After we hung up, I walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. The family photos lining the hallway told the story of Sarah's life from infant to adult. Her first steps in the living room, Christmas mornings around the tree Margaret had insisted on decorating herself every year, graduation photos from high school and college, birthday parties with friends who'd long since scattered to different cities and different lives. In every photo, Sarah's smile was genuine, unguarded, full of the confidence that came from knowing she was loved without condition. When had that smile started looking different? When had the spontaneous laughter been replaced by the careful, measured responses of someone who'd learned to check with someone else before expressing an opinion? I stopped at my favorite photo, taken when Sarah was 12. She'd wanted to help me install new kitchen cabinets, insisted she was old enough to use power tools. I'd given her a cordless drill and let her drive screws into practice wood while I did the real work. In the photo, she's wearing safety glasses that are too big for her face, concentrating intently on her task, completely absorbed in the moment. That was the daughter I remembered. Independent, curious, unafraid to try new things, confident in her father's love and support. When had she become someone who needed permission to accept a wedding gift? My phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah again. Dad, I hope you understand this isn't personal. David and I just want to start our marriage on the right foot. We love you. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. What I didn't text was the question burning in my mind. Whose definition of the right foot were they using? The next morning brought Jim's preliminary report, delivered via encrypted email with the efficiency that had made Peterson and Associates the most trusted law firm in the city. Mitchell Marketing Solutions was indeed successful, but success was relative. Annual revenue of $780,000, which sounded impressive until you factored in overhead, salaries, and the aggressive expansion plans David had been promoting to potential investors. The company was leveraged to the hilt. Business loans, equipment financing, a line of credit that was nearly maxed out. David Mitchell was playing the classic entrepreneur's game of borrowing against future growth, betting everything on his ability to scale the business before the debt became unsustainable. More interesting was the client breakdown. 60% of their revenue came from 3 major accounts, which meant they were dangerously dependent on a small number of clients. Lose any one of those accounts, and the company would face serious cash flow problems within 60 days. But the real revelation was in the investor pitch deck David had been circulating. He was seeking $2 million in exchange for 30% equity, which valued his company at roughly $6.5 million. Ambitious, considering their actual assets and revenue streams. The pitch deck painted a picture of unlimited growth potential, expansion into new markets, revolutionary approaches to digital marketing that would disrupt the entire industry. It was the kind of presentation I'd seen hundreds of times over the years, heavy on vision and light on realistic projections. What caught my attention wasn't what was in the pitch deck, but what wasn't. No mention of contingency plans if growth targets weren't met. No discussion of market risks or competitive threats. No acknowledgement that they were one lost client away from serious financial trouble. David Mitchell was either supremely confident or completely naive about the realities of business expansion. Given his age and experience, I suspected it was more the latter than the former. I called Jim back. What would it take to acquire the company outright? Based on their debt obligations and actual market value, probably $3 to $4 million. Maybe less if they get desperate for capital. And how desperate are they? According to my sources, pretty desperate. They've been shopping that investment opportunity around for 6 months without any serious bites. Word is getting out that their projections might be overly optimistic. I leaned back in Margaret's chair, processing the information. David Mitchell had convinced my daughter that accepting $50,000 from her father would compromise their independence. Meanwhile, he was desperately seeking millions from complete strangers to keep his business afloat. The irony was almost poetic. Jim, I want you to set up a shell corporation, something completely unconnected to Harrison Industries or my personal holdings. Can you do that quietly? Of course. What kind of business are we talking about? Investment and consulting. Something that would logically be interested in acquiring small marketing firms. Robert? Are you sure about this? Family business can get complicated very quickly. I thought about Sarah's voice on the phone, the way she'd parroted David's words about independence and self-reliance. I thought about the little girl in the safety glasses, so eager to help her father build something with her own hands. Jim, my daughter thinks she's protecting her independence by rejecting my help. Maybe it's time she learned what real independence looks like. And what does that mean exactly? It means David Mitchell is about to discover that the business world is smaller than he thinks, and that actions have consequences he never considered. The Shell Corporation was established within a week. Meridian Capital Partners, a legitimate investment firm with offices in Chicago, a small but impressive portfolio of successful acquisitions, and absolutely no traceable connection to Robert Harrison or Harrison Industries. Jim had done his usual thorough work. Meridian had its own bank accounts, its own legal representation, its own business address in a prestigious downtown office building. On paper, it looked like exactly the kind of sophisticated investor that David Mitchell had been courting for months. The approach came through proper channels. Meridian's representatives reached out to Mitchell Marketing Solutions through their business attorney, expressing interest in the investment opportunity and requesting a formal presentation. David Mitchell's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday, promising a comprehensive overview of the company's growth potential and strategic vision. I wouldn't be at that meeting, of course. Meridian Capital Partners was represented by a team of legitimate investment professionals who specialized in marketing and advertising acquisitions. They knew their business, asked the right questions, and had no idea they were working for Robert Harrison. But I would be listening to every word through the detailed reports they'd provide afterward. The game had begun, and David Mitchell had no idea he was playing against someone who'd been perfecting these strategies for 35 years. Sarah called that Tuesday evening, her voice bright with excitement. Dazra. Dad, you'll never guess what happened. David's company is getting serious interest from a major investment firm. They might get the funding they need to expand into 3 new cities. I set down my evening coffee, watching the sun set through Margaret's roses. That's wonderful, sweetheart. What kind of investment firm? Meridian Capital Partners. They specialize in marketing and advertising companies. David says they have an incredible track record of helping small firms grow into regional powerhouses. Meridian Capital Partners, I repeated, letting the name hang in the air like a question. I've never heard of them. They're based in Chicago. Very exclusive, very selective about their investments. David says getting their attention is like winning the lottery. Winning the lottery. If only she knew how accurate that metaphor really was. He's meeting with them Thursday afternoon, Sarah continued, her enthusiasm bubbling through the phone like champagne. Dad, this could change everything for us. If they invest, David won't have to worry about those business loans anymore, and we can finally start planning our real future. Our real future. The phrase struck me like a physical blow, as if the life they were building now was somehow provisional, temporary, waiting for David's business success to make it legitimate. That sounds promising, I managed, my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. What kind of terms are they discussing? I don't know all the details, but David says they're talking about a partnership, not just an investment. They want to help him expand the business, maybe even acquire other marketing firms to build a regional network. Partnership. I almost smiled at the irony. David Mitchell, who'd rejected my $50,000 gift to maintain his independence, was about to discover what real partnership looked like when you needed other people's money to survive. Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course, Dad. I walked to my office window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, David Mitchell was probably celebrating his good fortune, convinced that his business acumen had finally attracted the attention of serious investors. Are you happy? Really happy, not just excited about the business opportunity, but happy with your life, with your choices? The pause stretched long enough for me to hear traffic sounds in the background, probably David's apartment near downtown where Sarah spent most of her time now. What kind of question is that? The kind a father asks when he loves his daughter and wants to make sure she's making decisions for the right reasons. Another pause, shorter this time, followed by a sigh that sounded too old for her 28 years. Du Shao. Dad, I know you think David is controlling me or something, but that's not what's happening. We're partners. We make decisions together. Partners. The same word she'd used to describe David's potential relationship with Meridian Capital. I wondered if she heard the parallel, if she understood what it meant to be the junior partner in any relationship. I'm sure you do, sweetheart. I just want you to remember that you have options. You always have options. I know that. And right now, my option is to build a life with the man I love, using our own resources, our own efforts. Our own resources. Except David's resources were about to become someone else's resources, someone else's control, someone else's vision for what Mitchell Marketing Solutions should become. Well, I hope Thursday's meeting goes well for him. For us, Dad. This affects both of us. For us. But when had David's business success become Sarah's identity? When had his dreams replaced hers? After we hung up, I sat in my office until well past midnight, reading through the detailed background reports Jim's team had compiled. David Mitchell's financial history painted a picture of a man who'd been leveraging other people's money since college. Student loans that took him 8 years to pay off. A car loan he'd rolled over 3 times to keep the payments manageable. Credit cards that stayed near their limits month after month. Even his apartment was financed through a rent-to-own agreement that let him live beyond his means while building equity at twice the normal rate. David Mitchell wasn't just comfortable with debt, he was addicted to it, constantly seeking new sources of capital to fund a lifestyle that his actual income couldn't support. Now he was about to learn what happened when you played that game with professionals who understood leverage better than you did. Thursday morning arrived gray and rainy, the kind of Seattle weather that made indoor meetings feel cozy and important. I spent the morning in my garden, tending to Margaret's roses while my phone waited silently on the kitchen counter. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By 4:30, I'd receive a detailed report from Meridian's representatives. By evening, I'd know exactly what David Mitchell was willing to give up for the promise of financial security. At 3:15, my phone rang. Sarah's number. "Dad, something strange is happening." I set down my pruning shears, noting the tension in her voice. "What kind of strange?" "David's been in that meeting for over an hour, but he's not answering his phone. He said he'd text me every 30 minutes to let me know how it was going." Every 30 minutes. The man who preached independence had trained my daughter to expect regular updates, like a nervous parent waiting for a teenager to come home from a first date. Maybe he's just focused on the presentation. These kinds of meetings can run long. Maybe, but this feels different. He was so confident this morning, talking about how this was going to change everything, how we'd finally be able to prove ourselves. Prove themselves. Still David's words, still his obsession with validation, still his need to demonstrate that he was worthy of success without accepting help from anyone who actually cared about him. "Sarah, whatever happens in that meeting, it doesn't change who you are or what you're worth." "I know that, but Dad, this business means everything to David. If this doesn't work out, I don't know what he'll do." What he'll do. Not what they'll do, not what she'll do, but what David will do. My daughter had become so absorbed in his dreams that she'd forgotten she had her own life to live. "Sweetheart, can I tell you something your mother used to say?" "What?" "She used to say that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by watching how they handle disappointment. Not success, disappointment. Success is easy. Disappointment reveals character." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Why are you telling me that now?" "Because whatever happens in that meeting, you're going to learn something important about the man you're planning to marry. Make sure you're paying attention." At 4:45, Jim's encrypted report arrived in my email. I opened it with the anticipation of a chess player watching his opponent realize they'd walked into a carefully prepared trap. The meeting had gone exactly as planned. David Mitchell had arrived punctually, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. He'd presented his vision with the enthusiasm of a man who believed his own marketing materials. Meridian's representatives had listened politely, asked probing questions about cash flow and client retention, requested detailed financial projections for the next 5 years. David had answered confidently, painting a picture of inevitable growth and market dominance. Then they'd made their offer. Not an investment, an acquisition. Meridian Capital Partners was prepared to purchase Mitchell Marketing Solutions outright for $4.2 million. Cash deal, immediate closing, with David remaining as general manager under a 5-year employment contract. General manager, not CEO, not owner, not visionary leader. General manager with a salary, benefits, and performance metrics determined by someone else. The offer was generous by any reasonable standard. $4.2 million would pay off all of David's debts, provide him with financial security, and still leave him running the company he'd built. But it would also mean giving up control, accepting oversight, reporting to people who might have different ideas about how Mitchell Marketing Solutions should operate. According to Jim's sources, David had asked for time to consider the offer. Standard practice, but his body language had suggested someone who'd been expecting partnership and received employment instead. The meeting had ended with handshakes and promises to follow up within 48 hours. Professional, cordial, completely routine. Except for one detail that made me smile despite everything. When David had asked about Meridian's decision-making process, about who would ultimately approve the acquisition, the lead representative had mentioned that their principal investor preferred to remain anonymous, but took a very personal interest in family-owned businesses. Family-owned businesses, the irony was perfect. My phone rang at 6:30. Sarah again, her voice tight with stress. Dad, David's home, but he won't talk about the meeting. He's been sitting at his computer for 2 hours, just staring at the screen. Did he tell you anything about what happened? Only that it wasn't what he expected, that they want to buy the company instead of investing in it. And how does he feel about that? I think he's scared, Dad, really scared. He keeps talking about losing control, about becoming just another employee in his own company. Just another employee. The man who'd convinced my daughter that accepting help from family would compromise their independence was discovering what real dependence looked like when you needed other people's money more than they needed your business. Sarah, what do you think he should do? The question seemed to surprise her. What do I think? Yes, you. Not what David thinks you should think, not what you think he wants to hear, but what you actually think about this situation. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of a question she apparently hadn't been asked in a long time. I think, she said slowly, I think maybe $4 million is a lot of money for a company that employs 7 people. It is. And I think maybe being a general manager of a successful company is better than being the CEO of a company that might fail. That's very wise. But I also think David sees this as giving up his dreams. And what do you see it as? Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of uncertainty I hadn't heard since she was a child. Dad, can I ask you something? When you built Harrison Industries, did you ever take on partners? People who invested in your company? Several times. How did you decide when it was worth giving up some control for the security? I walked to my office, looking at the wall of awards and photographs that documented 35 years of business decisions. Some brilliant, some lucky, some that had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked to build. Sarah, the hardest thing about business isn't making money. It's knowing when to accept help and when to maintain independence. The smartest entrepreneurs understand that keeping 51% of something valuable is better than owning 100% of something that fails. David says that accepting other people's money means accepting other people's control. David's not wrong about that. But the question is whether you're strong enough to maintain your values and vision even when you're not the only person making decisions. What do you mean? I mean that real independence isn't about refusing help. It's about being confident enough in who you are that you can accept partnership without losing yourself. The words hung in the air between us, carrying implications that went far beyond David's business dilemma. Sarah was quiet for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Dad? I'm here, sweetheart. I think I need to have a serious conversation with my fiancé about what independence really means. I think that's a very good idea. That Friday morning brought unexpected clarity in the form of Sarah's voice on my phone. Different somehow, steadier than it had been in months. Dad, I need to tell you what happened last night. I set down my coffee, recognizing something in her tone that reminded me of Margaret when she'd made up her mind about something important. I'm listening. David and I talked about the Meridian offer until almost 3 in the morning. Really talked, not just him explaining why his way was right and me agreeing with him. The distinction wasn't lost on me. How did that go? It was the first real conversation we've had in months, maybe years. She paused and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing the way she used to when she was nervous. Dad, I asked him about your wedding gift. My chest tightened. What about it? I asked him why he was so adamant about refusing $50,000 from my father when he was perfectly willing to accept $4 million from complete strangers. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. I waited, knowing she needed to work through this herself. His answer was illuminating, she continued, using the clinical tone she'd developed in graduate school. He said it was different because investors expect returns, while family gifts come with emotional strings attached. And what did you say to that? I asked him what kind of emotional strings he thought you'd attach to a wedding gift. Whether he honestly believed you'd use $50,000 to control our marriage? I found myself holding my breath, waiting for her answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask myself. He couldn't give me a straight answer, Dad. He kept talking about independence and self-reliance, but when I pressed him about specifics, about what exactly he thought you'd demand in return for a wedding gift, he just got angry. Angry, the response of someone whose position couldn't withstand scrutiny. Sarah, what conclusion did you draw from that conversation? That David isn't afraid of your money, he's afraid of you. The words hit me like a revelation and a gut punch simultaneously. Afraid of me? Why would he be afraid of me? Because you represent everything he's trying to prove he doesn't need. Success, stability, the kind of wealth that comes from building something lasting instead of just talking about it. I walked to my office window, looking out at the city where I'd spent 4 decades, learning that business was ultimately about people, about understanding what motivated them, what they feared, what they truly wanted beneath the surface of what they claimed to want. And how do you feel about that? Honestly, tired. Really tired of defending decisions I didn't make to people who don't understand our relationship. Tired of pretending that rejecting your generosity was my idea when we both know it wasn't. The admission hung between us like a bridge finally being built across a gulf that had been widening for 2 years. Sarah, can I ask you something that might be difficult to answer? After last night, I don't think anything could be more difficult than the questions I've already asked myself. When you think about your future, about the life you want to build, whose dreams are you actually pursuing? Silence. Long enough for me to wonder if I'd pushed too hard, asked too much, demanded honesty she wasn't ready to give. I don't know anymore, Dad. For so long, David's dreams felt like our dreams. His success felt like our success. But sitting in his apartment last night, watching him agonize over whether to accept an offer that would solve all his financial problems, I realized something. What's that? I realized I've spent 2 years of my life worried about proving we don't need help, instead of building something worth having. The words carried a weight that made my throat tight. This was my daughter speaking, not the echo of David's philosophies, not the careful repetition of someone else's talking points. Sarah, what do you want to do about the Meridian offer? I told David he should take it. $4.2 million for a company with 7 employees and debt obligations he can't meet without outside investment. It's not just a good offer, it's a lifeline. How did he respond to that? He accused me of not believing in him, said that if I truly supported his vision, I'd want him to hold out for a better deal, one that let him maintain control. I found myself gripping the phone tighter. And what did you tell him? I told him that believing in someone doesn't mean enabling their delusions, that supporting his vision doesn't require ignoring financial reality. Pride swelled in my chest, the kind of pride that comes from watching your child demonstrate wisdom you hoped you'd taught them but weren't sure they'd absorbed. How did he take that? Not well. He's been at his office since 6 this morning, probably trying to find alternative investors who will give him what he wants instead of what he needs. What he wants instead of what he needs. The fundamental mistake that had destroyed more businesses than I could count over the years. Sarah, what are you going to do? I'm going to make some decisions that should have been made a long time ago, starting with accepting your wedding gift. The words hit me like unexpected sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Are you sure about that? Dana Fido. Dad, I've spent 2 years letting someone else define what independence means for me. Real independence is making my own choices based on my own values, not proving myself to someone who sees generosity as weakness. I closed my eyes, feeling something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Sarah, you know that gift comes with no strings attached, no expectations, no conditions. I know, that's what makes it a gift instead of a transaction. The distinction was everything, the difference between love and leverage, between family and business. There's something else, she continued, her voice carrying a new resolve. I want to postpone the wedding. My heart stopped. Postpone it? Not cancel it. Postpone it. David and I need time to figure out whether we're building a partnership or whether I'm just funding someone else's ego. The clinical precision of her language told me she'd thought this through carefully, weighed options with the methodical approach I'd tried to teach her about important decisions. How long are you thinking? 6 months. Maybe a year. Long enough for both of us to remember who we were before we became David and Sarah, the unit that exists to validate his business dreams. I sat down heavily in Margaret's chair, processing the magnitude of what she was telling me. Sarah, that's a big decision. Are you sure you're not just reacting to last night's conversation? Dad, I've been thinking about this for months. Last night just gave me permission to admit what I already knew. Which is? That I've been so focused on proving I don't need my family's support that I forgot why family support exists in the first place. And why does it exist? Because people who love you want to see you succeed, not prove yourself. They want to help you build something beautiful, not watch you struggle to demonstrate that you can survive without help. The words were like Margaret's voice, speaking through our daughter, carrying the wisdom of someone who understood that love wasn't about keeping score or maintaining perfect independence. Sarah, what can I do to support you through this? Just be my dad. Not my investor, not my business advisor, just my dad who loves me enough to let me make my own mistakes and wise enough to be there when I'm ready to learn from them. I can do that. Good. Because I have a feeling the next few months are going to be complicated. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant for everyone involved. Sarah was finding her way back to herself, but David still had to face the reality of his situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jim Peterson. "Mitchell called Meridian this morning, wants to counter-offer. Should we respond?" I typed back quickly. "What kind of counter-offer?" "Wants them to invest $2 million for 30% equity instead of buying outright. Still thinks he can maintain control." David Mitchell was still playing the same game, still trying to get other people's money without giving up his decision-making power. He hadn't learned anything from his conversation with Sarah, hadn't absorbed the lesson that real partnership requires real compromise. I called Jim directly. "What do you think about his counteroffer?" "Honestly, it shows he doesn't understand his position. Meridian has all the leverage here. His company needs capital more than they need his company." "So what happens next?" "Meridian will probably reject the counteroffer and give him 48 hours to accept the original deal. Standard negotiation tactic." "And if he doesn't accept?" "Then he's back to square one, looking for investors who don't exist while his debt obligations keep growing." I thought about Sarah's decision to postpone the wedding, about her recognition that she'd been enabling David's unrealistic expectations about how business actually worked. "Jim, I want Meridian to reject the counteroffer, but I don't want them to give him 48 hours. "What do you want them to do?" "I want them to withdraw the offer entirely. Tell him they've decided to pursue other opportunities." Jim's pause told me he understood the implications. "Robert, that's going to put him in a very difficult position. Without that $4 million, his company could be in serious trouble within 6 months." "I know. You're essentially forcing him to face the consequences of his pride without a safety net." "Jim, my daughter just made one of the most mature decisions I've heard from her in 2 years. She chose honesty over comfort, reality over fantasy. David Mitchell's about to learn the same lesson, whether he wants to or not." "And if his company fails?" "Then Sarah will learn something important about the character of the man she was planning to marry. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them see the truth clearly." "All right, I'll have Meridian send the withdrawal notice this afternoon." That evening, I was reading in my living room when my phone rang. Not Sarah this time, but a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Harrison, this is David Mitchell. I think we need to talk." His voice carried none of the confident charm I'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. This was the voice of someone who'd just discovered that the world didn't operate according to his assumptions. "David, what can I do for you?" "I'd like to meet with you, tomorrow if possible. There are some things I need to discuss." "What kind of things?" A pause, filled with the sound of someone swallowing his pride. "Business things, family things, things I should have discussed with you a long time ago." I looked at Margaret's photo on the end table, remembering her advice about giving people enough rope to either climb out of their holes or hang themselves with their own poor choices. "All right, David, tomorrow at 10, my house." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I appreciate this." "David?" "Yes, sir?" "Come alone. Whatever we discuss tomorrow, it needs to be between you and me." After I hung up, I walked through my house, thinking about the conversation that awaited us. David Mitchell was about to learn what it meant to need help from someone whose generosity he'd rejected, whose family he'd tried to isolate, whose wisdom he'd dismissed as outdated thinking. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. David arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, his usual punctuality intact despite everything that had crumbled around him in the past 48 hours. Through my front window, I watched him sit in his car for several minutes, gathering courage or rehearsing words, before finally walking to my door with the measured steps of someone approaching an execution. He looked older somehow, the confident swagger replaced by the careful posture of a man who'd discovered that the world was far less impressed with his vision than he'd believed. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair showing signs of sleepless nights and desperate calculations. "Mr. Harrison," he said when I opened the door, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I led him to my office, the same room where I'd orchestrated his downfall with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades learning that business was ultimately about understanding people's weaknesses and motivations. He sat across from my desk like a defendant awaiting sentencing. "You said you wanted to discuss business and family matters," I said, settling into Margaret's chair. "Which would you like to start with?" David's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a manila folder, the same kind of portfolio he'd carried to his meeting with Meridian Capital Partners. The business matters are pretty straightforward. Meridian withdrew their offer yesterday afternoon. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? His eyes met mine for the first time since he'd arrived, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but recognition. Mr. Harrison, I've spent the last 24 hours making some phone calls, doing some research. What kind of research? The kind that reveals Meridian Capital Partners was incorporated 6 weeks ago. The kind that shows their business address is a shared office space with no permanent staff. The kind that makes a man realize he's been played by someone much smarter than he is. I kept my expression neutral, though I felt a flicker of respect for David's detective work. That's interesting information. What conclusions did you draw from it? That you own Meridian Capital Partners, that the $4.2 million offer came from you, that I've been negotiating with my future father-in-law while thinking I was impressing sophisticated investors. The admission hung between us like a confession, stripped of pretense and posturing. David Mitchell was finally speaking truth instead of marketing copy. And how does that make you feel? Humiliated, angry, grateful. He ran his hands through his hair, destroying what remained of his professional appearance. Mostly confused about why you'd go to such elaborate lengths to help someone who'd rejected your generosity. Is that what you think I was doing? Helping you? David's eyes narrowed slightly. Weren't you? I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at Margaret's garden where spring was gradually replacing winter's damage. David, let me ask you something. When you convinced Sarah to refuse my wedding gift, what did you think would happen? I thought we'd prove we could build our own life without depending on family money. And when you told her that accepting help from family creates dependency, what were you really saying? The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was saying that I was afraid of being compared to you, afraid that Sarah would realize her father had accomplished more in business than I ever would. Truth. Finally, after 2 years of elaborate justifications and philosophical posturing, David Mitchell had spoken one honest sentence about his motivations. Go on? I was afraid that if she accepted your money, she'd start questioning why she was with someone who needed other people's capital to keep his business afloat, while her father had built something lasting without help. I turned back to face him. David, I built Harrison Industries with help from dozens of people, investors, partners, mentors, employees who took risks on an unproven company. The difference isn't that I didn't need help. The difference is that I was grateful for it instead of resentful of it. I know that now. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still playing the same game. You came here hoping I'd bail you out while letting you maintain the fiction that you're in control. David's face flushed red. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? He opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them across my desk with shaking hands. Financial statements, debt schedules, cash flow projections, a complete picture of Mitchell Marketing Solutions' precarious situation. I'm showing you the truth. My company is 3 months away from bankruptcy. I owe $400,000 to various creditors. I've leveraged everything I own, and some things I don't actually own yet. I studied the documents, noting the progression from optimistic projections to desperate reality. David had been living on borrowed time and borrowed money for longer than I'd realized. Why are you showing me this? Because Sarah told me she's postponing our wedding until I learn the difference between pride and stupidity. The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. My daughter had found her voice at exactly the moment when David needed to hear it most. And what's your response to that? My response is that she's right. About everything. About me being afraid of you. About my refusal to accept help being more about ego than independence. About me turning our relationship into a vehicle for proving myself instead of building something together. I sat back down, processing this admission. David, what do you want from me? I want to understand what I did wrong so I can fix it. I want to know how to rebuild my relationship with your daughter. And yes, I want to know if there's any way to save my business, but not as a handout, as a transaction that makes sense for both of us. All three of those things are connected, you realize that? What do you mean? I mean that fixing your relationship with Sarah requires understanding what partnership actually means, and understanding partnership is the key to saving your business. David leaned forward, his earlier defensiveness replaced by genuine attention. I'm listening. Sarah postponed the wedding because she realized you'd been making major life decisions without consulting her, while expecting her to support those decisions unconditionally. Sound familiar? You mean like refusing your wedding gift without asking what she actually wanted? Exactly. And like building a business expansion plan without considering whether you could actually execute it successfully. David's shoulders sagged as the parallels became clear. I've been treating everyone like junior partners in my vision instead of equal partners in building something together. Now you're beginning to understand. So how do I fix it? I pulled out a legal pad and began writing numbers. The same kind of financial analysis I'd done thousands of times over the years when evaluating potential partnerships. Bitter. David, your company has good fundamentals, strong client relationships, solid reputation, experienced team. The problem isn't your business model, it's your capital structure and growth strategy. Meaning? Meaning you've been trying to grow too fast with too much debt. Instead of building sustainable growth, you've been betting everything on projections that were optimistic at best. I showed him the numbers I'd calculated. Here's what I'm prepared to offer. Harrison Industries will acquire Mitchell Marketing Solutions for $3.5 million. You'll stay on as general manager with a 5-year contract and profit-sharing agreement. After 5 years, you'll have the option to buy back majority control at fair market value. David stared at the numbers for a long time. That's less than Meridian offered. Meridian was a shell company designed to teach you a lesson. This is a real offer from someone who actually cares about your success. What's the catch? No catch, but there are conditions. Such as? I leaned back in my chair, thinking about Margaret's advice on tough love and necessary lessons. First, you'll report to my operations director and follow our established business practices. No more leveraging the company's assets for speculative growth. David nodded slowly. That's reasonable. Second, you'll attend quarterly business planning sessions where major decisions get made by committee, not by individual vision. Meaning I give up control. Meaning you learn to share control, there's a difference. What else? The third, you'll apologize to Sarah for the past 2 years of treating her like a supporting character in your story instead of the co-author she should have been. David's face went pale. Mr. Harrison, I love your daughter. I know you do. But love isn't enough if you don't know how to be a partner instead of a CEO in your personal relationships. And if I agree to all of this, then you'll have a financially stable business, a sustainable growth plan, and the opportunity to prove you can build something lasting instead of just impressive. David stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the same garden where I'd spent countless hours thinking about family, business, and the difference between success and significance. What about Sarah? What about her? Will accepting this offer help me win her back, or am I just trading one form of dependence for another? The question showed more insight than I'd expected from him. David, Sarah didn't postpone the wedding because you need help. She postponed it because you couldn't admit you needed help. There's a crucial difference. I'm not sure I understand. Strength isn't about never needing assistance. Strength is about being secure enough in yourself to accept help gracefully and use it wisely. David turned back to face me. Like accepting a wedding gift from your future father-in-law without seeing it as a threat to your independence. Exactly. Mr. Harrison, if I sign this agreement, will you consider giving us that wedding gift again? I smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. David, that gift was never rescinded. It was just waiting for you to become mature enough to accept it. And you think I'm mature enough now? I think you're learning what maturity actually means. Whether you continue growing is up to you. David returned to his chair and picked up the acquisition agreement I'd prepared. When do you need an answer? Take your time. But David, understand that this offer expires if you try to shop it around or use it as leverage with other potential investors. This is a one-time opportunity based on trust, not negotiation. I understand. He gathered up his financial documents, his movements more confident than when he'd arrived. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Why didn't you just tell me 2 years ago that you thought I was making mistakes? Why go through all this elaborate chess game instead of having an honest conversation? I thought about the question, about the difference between advice that's sought and wisdom that's imposed. David, would you have listened to me 2 years ago? Honestly, probably not. Then you have your answer. Sometimes people need to discover their own limitations before they're ready to accept guidance. And sometimes they need to lose everything they think they want before they can see what they actually need. Now you're thinking like a businessman instead of just an entrepreneur. David stood up, extending his hand across my desk. Mr. Harrison, thank you for the lesson, for the opportunity, and for not giving up on someone who probably didn't deserve your patience. I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip and the directness of his gaze. David, everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. The question is whether they're wise enough to take that chance when it's offered. After he left, I called Sarah to let her know about the morning's conversation. Her voice carried a lightness I hadn't heard in months. Dad, did he really apologize for the wedding gift situation? He did, and he asked if the offer was still open. What did you tell him? I told him that gifts given with love don't expire. They just wait for the right moment to be received. And what about his business? That's between David and me. But Sarah, I want you to know that whatever happens with the company, it won't affect my relationship with you or my feelings about your future together. I know that, Dad. I think I've always known that, even when I was letting someone else convince me otherwise. Sarah, are you happy with your decision to postpone the wedding? I'm happy with my decision to start making my own decisions again. The wedding will happen when we're both ready to be partners instead of a CEO and his supporting cast. That's very wise. I learned from the best. A week later, David signed the acquisition agreement at Jim Peterson's office, with Sarah present as a witness and equal participant in the decision. Watching them discuss the terms together, I saw glimpses of the partnership they could become if they continued growing in the right direction. The wedding was rescheduled for the following spring, giving them time to rebuild their relationship on more solid foundations. Sarah accepted the $50,000 wedding gift with grace and gratitude, using it to fund a honeymoon in Italy and a down payment on a house they chose together. Mitchell Marketing Solutions became Harrison Marketing Division, with David proving himself as a competent general manager who learned to value collaboration over control. Within 2 years, the division had grown into one of our most profitable subsidiaries, built on sustainable practices instead of speculative dreams. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching my daughter rediscover her own voice and her future husband learn that true independence comes from being strong enough to accept help when you need it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to earn what they thought they were entitled to receive. David Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it completely. And in the process, he became worthy of my daughter's love and my family's respect. That, I realized, had been the plan all along.